He left me when I turned 50, married his mistress, and immediately moved her into the house I had paid for. He informed me that I was too old and boring, and that he needed someone with more energy after 25 years of marriage. He then handed me the divorce papers as if they were a formality, as if our life together had been nothing more than a phase. A few days later, he moved her into the home I had constructed piece by piece. They assumed that I would quietly fade away, like a chapter he had closed. However, they were unaware that I still had my name on the deed, and the house was not solely his. Before I begin, I would like to express my gratitude for your attention. If you are at ease, please provide the location from which you are tuning in and the time. I would be delighted to learn more. Now I would like to share the actual events that transpired. I was seated across from Eric at the same old kitchen table where I used to pack his lunches, pay the bills, and assist our son Ethan with his homework, when he informed me that he wanted a divorce. He was unable to meet my eyes and instead gazed into his coffee as if it contained the answers. I believe that we have outgrown each other, much like I was a jacket that no longer fit. We had been married for 27 years. I relinquished a promotion at the bank when Ethan was born because Eric worked erratic hours and someone needed to be at home. I managed the household from top to bottom, including cooking, cleaning, and managing finances. I even cared for his mother for 2 years without a single complaint. I did not request anything extravagant. Rather, I requested a small amount of respect and loyalty. However, I was served with divorce papers on Tuesday and silence by Wednesday. By the end of the month, he claimed that he needed more space and relocated to a house across town, not a hotel or apartment. He was not alone. He had a roommate. Ethan attempted to maintain a neutral demeanor as he moved in with Sienna, the same woman he had casually introduced to me at a Christmas party 2 years prior. Sienna was 34 years old, the same age as our son, and they did not attempt to conceal their relationship. Within a few weeks, they were posting photos on social media, wine tasting in Soma, walking barefoot on beaches, and smiling as if they had not just destroyed someone's life. Meanwhile, I was alone in the house I had purchased, surrounded by furniture that I had selected, and gazing at chairs that were once full. Ethan attempted to maintain a neutral demeanor. He was 25 years old and still in the middle of the situation. He expressed his reluctance to adopt a stance, and I simply affirmed and said, "You don't have to. I already know the positions of all parties." One morning I received a letter in the mail that was not from Eric, but from Sienna. The letter was printed on pastel pink stationery and read, "Dear Carla, please arrange a time to collect the remainder of your belongings. Eric and I are in the process of settling in and would appreciate the opportunity to begin this new chapter without any interruptions. Mornings are the most convenient. Sienna Simmons, who captured my final photograph, greeted me cordially. Name moved into my home and had the audacity to refer to me as an interruption. I remained seated at the kitchen table in the same position until he informed me that we were finished gazing at the letter. My tea had cooled, and I failed to notice that my hands were trembling with rage, not from grief. The house was mine. We had purchased it together, but I was the one who had found it and worked weekends and double shifts to make the down payment. My name was still on the mortgage, as Eric had always claimed that refinancing was too much of a hassle. Now, that hassle was upon me. I was on the verge of responding by biting him back when I took up the phone and called my oldest friend, Valerie. She has been a lawyer for nearly 2 decades and is more familiar with me than anyone else. After I explained everything, she hesitated and inquired, "Do you still have your name on the deed?" I consented, and he did not purchase your release. Then she inquired, "Carla, do you still have legal ownership of half of that house?" I was taken aback by her statement, as she informed me that I did not require anyone's permission to file for a partition action, which would either compel a sale or require them to pay me to retain the property. I inquired whether they would be required to vacate if they were unable to purchase it. She confirmed that they would. I observed the rose shrubs that I had planted last spring blossoming once more, as if nothing had changed, and instructed her to do the same. Eric called Carla 2 days later, his voice brimming with inflated pride and feigned concern. Carla, did you truly hire a lawyer? Yes, I asked him why you were making this more difficult than it needed to be. He attempted to guilt trip me as usual, claiming that I was bitter and that I needed to let go of the fact that Sienna did not feel comfortable with me being around. I did not raise my voice. Instead, I simply looked at him and said, "Well, maybe she shouldn't be living in a house that still has my name on the title." Naturally, he terminated the call. However, this was not the conclusion. Sienna sent me another email, this time with a condescending tone, asserting that I was embarrassing myself and should step aside to allow younger individuals to enjoy their happiness. She also claimed that Eric deserved a fresh start and accused me of clinging to a marriage that had ended years ago. I did not respond. Instead, I called Valerie and suggested that we increase the intensity. We submitted the official paperwork without making any noise. The petition was concise, clean, and undisputed. Eric was unaware of the situation, and neither was Sienna. Valerie advised me to remain silent and allow the court system to speak on my behalf. However, when I approached the driveway that was previously mine and observed Sienna's white BMW parked in my spot, I was forced to pause and collect my final possessions, as she had so eloquently advised in the pink letter. I did not knock. Instead, I used my key, which Eric had forgotten. I entered the front door and stepped into the living room that was once my home. The couch was still present, but everything else was out of place. The walls were painted a lifeless beige, reminiscent of a bland hotel lobby. My family photos had been removed and replaced with framed quotes about positivity, good vibes, and love. It was as if Pinterest had thrown up all my memories. In the kitchen, everything had been rearranged and my spice rack had vanished. The mason jar that I had previously used for tea bags now held organic lollipops. I felt a tightening in my chest, not from grief, but from the heat that was rising. In my gut, that was the moment Sienna, who was wearing one of Eric's old t-shirts, came downstairs and froze the moment she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I held up her email, just grabbing my things, and she snapped, "You're supposed to schedule a time." "We have rules now, we have boundaries." I walked past her calmly and unbothered. "Well, sweetheart, as long as my name is still on this house, I'll come and go as I feel like. Eric will be informed of this." Her face was suffused a brilliant red color. I stated that he should have been the one to greet me. I packed only the essentials, including a few boxes, some old books, and my mother's necklace. I did not take much because I had no intention of ever returning to the area. I did not do so out of defeat, but rather because I refused to give them the satisfaction of believing they had driven me out. Sienna followed me around like a shadow, her arms crossed and her eyes rolling. She whispered under her breath, which was pathetic. I stopped cold and excused myself. She straightened up as if she was about to throw her hands up. I did not recoil or twitch. I simply looked her in the eye and stated that better does not endure and that I am not engaging in games. Rather, I am reclaiming what is rightfully mine. The following evening, I departed. Valerie contacted me to inform me that the documentation had been processed and the partition action had been officially accepted by the court. Sienna would be served in the morning. "Would you like to deliver it yourself?" I replied. "Let the system slap them," in response to her request. The following day, Eric contacted me on 4 separate occasions. I did not respond, and he left a single voicemail. He asked, "Carla, what are you doing? This is insane. You are compel us to sell the house after all the work I have done for you." I laughed at his actions, as I was the one who had given up promotions, stayed through the layoffs, cooked every meal, paid half the bills, and kept us afloat. I did not leave, but he did. He contacted me again the following day, but I continued to disregard him. On the 3rd day, I picked up the phone and spoke with Carla. We needed to discuss the reason for forcing the sale of a house that I still legally own. "We are unable to afford to purchase you out at this time. Perhaps you should have considered this before you relocated her." His voice softened, reminiscent of the Eric I used to know. "Carla, you do not require this level of stress." I agreed, but you are the one who brought it to this point. I hung up. 2 days later, Sienna called, and it was not a text, it was a full-blown conversation. Carla wept. "You are ruining us. You are humiliating us. Please, Carla, be a woman about this." I paused. Being a woman means knowing your worth. I am done shrinking for either of you." I then blocked her from that moment on. I did not say a word. Valerie handled the rest and the paperwork did the talking. Eric and Sienna hired a lawyer to try to fight the partition, but it did not work. The judge looked at the mortgage and deed and said the only words that mattered. Miss Simmons remains a legal co-owner. Unless the parties agree to a private buyout, the property must be sold. Valerie smiled. I was not yet celebrating. They still had the keys, hot water and electricity, and a roof. However, they were now faced with a 60-day deadline to either buy me out or vacate the property. I was aware that they were unable to do either, as Sienna lacked employment and Eric's income had remained constant. Additionally, they were burdened with legal fees on top of the mortgage. One morning, I passed by and observed a handwritten "For Sale by Owner" sign that was affixed to the front lawn. It was evident that they were attempting to avoid realtor fees and expedite the process, but the heiressette was challenging and karma had no favorites. I sat down at my new kitchen table in my cozy yet peaceful rental and lit a candle, not for them, but for me. This was not about revenge. It was about restoration, and they were about to experience the sensation of being erased from something they believed they owned. Sienna began posting vague, passive-aggressive quotes on Facebook, stating that some women are unable to let go and that bitterness will rot their souls. Her feed was filled with filtered selfies and dramatic captions, but I was not seeking pity or chasing healing energy. This was not a spiritual experience. The journey was legal. However, by the third week, their handwritten sign had vanished and been replaced by a polished professional, now listed placard. I recognized the real estate agent's name, Valerie, who had made a few calls. We were not allowing them to get away with sneaky sales to Sienna's cousin or Eric's golf buddy. This was going to be a clean, honest split, and that meant working with us. Eric texted me again, this time with a different tone, this time regarding the home staging. I did not respond for a few hours. Later, he inquired if I could refrain from removing everything because Sienna was feeling extremely exposed. I nearly responded by reminding him that she did not appear to be particularly exposed when she wore my husband's t-shirt and called me pathetic. However, I took a deep breath and delegated the task to Valerie, who coordinated the process with the realtor. I never had to return to the house, and this was deliberate. I allowed them to feel the walls closing in, let them walk past the bedroom where I had slept for 27 years, and ponder what else they never truly knew. By the time the showings began, the cracks were beginning to appear. Sienna begged the listing agent to postpone visits until she could find a new place. But the agent reminded her politely but firmly that this was a court-ordered sale, not a favor. They were required to keep the house spotless and picture-perfect for strangers to walk through and silently judge their countertops. Ethan, bless him, mentioned to me in passing that Eric had been sleeping on the couch some nights and that the two of them were fighting nonstop. Eric even said to her, "This is what happens when you poke." But I was not a bear. I was the deed. They did not merely underestimate me. They never understood me at all. I was never the type of woman to scream or throw things. I was the type to sign legal documents with a steady hand and wait patiently for the storm I had planted to take root. 5 weeks later, we received an offer for the full asking price with no contingencies. The buyers were a young black couple expecting their first child who fell in love with the property the moment they stepped inside. Valerie contacted me before anyone else and informed me that they wanted to close in 2 weeks. I agreed, and that same day Eric called me 3 times. I declined to respond on multiple occasions, as I was in the process of having my nails painted in a color called brick dust. The symbolism of the color resonated with me. Later that evening, I listened to the voicemails. The initial message read, "Carla, this is a much larger issue than just the 2 of us. You are not interested in participating." The second was bitter. "You are truly willing to allow strangers to enter our home and destroy everything." The third one was even more painful. "I understand that we ended badly, but this is vindictive. You are not leaving us with anything." This was the first time he had expressed it to us as if they were officially a team, as if his betrayal had matured into a legitimate relationship. I suppose that was his way of expressing his feelings. On the day of the final walkthrough, I informed the agent that Sienna was all in for better or worse. Valerie informed me that the buyers had requested a brief extension and the time had elapsed when they departed the house. They were no longer the owners. They were merely trespassers who held keys that were no longer functional. I was $370,000 richer. 2 days later, Eric arrived at my new residence, a tranquil 2-bedroom rental with a view of a small garden. He knocked on the door as if he had any right to enter. I opened the door, but he was still there. He was not invited in. Rather, he appeared to have diminished, as if the weight of his own decisions had finally begun to bear on him. I approached him to inquire about the deposit for our new home, but he replied that I had folded my arms. Could you assist us with the deposit? We are currently short. I squinted, pardon me. He held up his palms, already defensive. I understand how it sounds, but we were unaware that you would actually follow through with all of this. You believed that I would remain silent. I finished for him, and he nodded slowly. You were never the spiteful type, and I am not spiteful. I stated that I am strategic. He shifted awkwardly and muttered something about Sienna staying with her sister and him crashing at a hotel in River Park. I didn't anticipate the outcome to be this way. He added, You ended it. I reminded him that you made your own choices and moved her into my house before the ink on our divorce was even dry. He had the nerve to appear hurt, despite the fact that we were in love. He whispered, Love doesn't steal, love doesn't lie, and love sure as hell doesn't send me a pink paper letter asking me to schedule pickups like I was some imposter. Stranger, I said. His eyes fell to the floor. I leaned against the doorframe and did the same. He stood there for a moment, nodded slowly, and left without another word. There was no argument, no outburst, just the kind of silence that comes from someone who finally understands they have lost. I did not immediately close the door. I watched him walk away and thought about all the years I had made myself small so that he could feel big. I thought about every time I bit my tongue so that he wouldn't look bad. I thought about the nights I had cried alone while he claimed to be working late. I smiled. The sound of a man realizing that he had gambled everything on someone who had never even read the fine print, and that justice does not always come with sirens or applause, is the sound of a signature on a dotted line. I already knew my next move a week after closing the house I helped build became someone else's fresh start. I did not cry. I never even drove past the house after the sale. Valerie suggested we meet up for lunch to celebrate, and we did so over fried catfish and collard greens at a small restaurant. Downtown, she raised her sweet tea, looked me in the eye, and said, You accomplished what most people only dream of. You made them feel the same way they made you feel, powerless. I nodded, but I knew in my heart that the purpose was not solely to exact revenge. It was to reclaim peace, find closure, and restore what had been lost. I will admit that there was a small part of me that wanted them to feel the sting, Eric. Sienna had moved out 2 days prior to the closing, and the realtor informed Valerie that they had left the property clean but cold, akin to a hotel room that had recently been vacated. I could envision Sienna fluffing pillows with her hands. The following night, Ethan called his mother, his voice hesitant, and he stomped through the rooms grumbling about lawyers and paperwork. They thought I was petty, but I wasn't the one who blurred the line first. That was them the day they moved her into my home as if I had never existed. Their father was not doing well. I maintained my silence. At present, he is lodging at a friend's residence. He claims that his credentials have been sullied and that Sienna is blaming him for everything. I stated plainly that she should not be allowed to act as queen in a castle that did not belong to him. Ethan sighed and rarefied. I don't want to take sides. I responded gently when you remained silent while they treated me as if I were invisible. He did not argue, but rather whispered, I'm sorry. I did not require him to argue. I simply required him to comprehend the breach that had occurred, not only between me and Eric, but also between all of us, in terms of family loyalty and respect. A few days later, I received an email from Sienna. Carla began with the phony politeness she was fond of using, and I am aware that we have had our disagreements. She then proceeded to explain that they were having difficulty locating a place and asked if I would consider lending them some money from the house sale to help them get back on their feet. She even had the audacity to write, "After all, it's not like you need it as much as we do." I stared at the screen, blinking, and then hit delete. There was no reply, no reaction, just silence. This was the loudest message I could send. Valerie later informed me that they would likely end up in a rental, which was a downgrade. In the weeks that followed, I discovered a sense of tranquility as a result of their treatment of me. I subsequently secured a part-time position at the local library, where I engaged in quiet, contemplative work surrounded by stories that seemed fitting. Although my new residence was not particularly grand, it was entirely mine, with no shared deeds, second toothbrushes, or waiting for someone else's decisions. It was a space of stillness and healing. One afternoon, while shelving books, a woman in her 40s approached me. She recognized me from church years ago and said, "I heard what happened. I just wanted to say hello. You handled that with grace." I thanked her, but before she left, she leaned in and whispered, "Power." That word stayed with me. I had never thought of myself in that way before, but I suppose it takes a certain amount of strength to lose everything and still rebuild something better quietly and deliberately without begging for approval or pity. A few days later, I encountered Eric again, but not by choice. I was picking up groceries and spotted a man slouched on a bench outside the pharmacy. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair was messy, and his overall posture was tired. It took me a while to realize that he was a stranger. He took a moment to recognize me, and upon seeing me, he promptly rose. "Carla, hello." I nodded at him, but I continued to walk. He followed me to my vehicle, and I am not attempting to dispute. He stated that I simply desired to converse. I paused and inquired about the subject matter. "I simply did not believe that you had the capacity to do it." He shifted clumsily. He added that I leaned against my car door with my arms folded, that you believed I was too feeble to fight back. I raised an eyebrow at the court filings and the house. He shook his head. "I was under the impression that you would be too fatigued." And that hit me harder than I had anticipated, because he was not mistaken. I had been weary of being overlooked and of dimming myself so that he could shine. But I then realized that tired is not the same as finished. I said quietly, "I guess you misjudged." He gave a sad little laugh, and Sienna left. I blinked, and she said that I embarrassed her, that she had given up everything for a man who couldn't even keep a roof over her head. She was wrong, and I asked him. He did not respond. I examined his face briefly before opening my car door and wished him good luck. He reached out slightly as if he wanted to say something else, but I was already settling into the driver's seat. I was relieved that I was not obligated to engage in another conversation with him. That evening, upon my return home, I opened the folder that Valerie had given me weeks earlier. The folder contained the deed transfer, the final payout, and all the legal confirmations. Tucked inside was a handwritten note from her that read, "You did not simply cash out, you cashed in on your piece." I folded the note neatly and placed it in my drawer. I then poured myself a glass of wine, lit a candle, and began to relax. For the first time in years, I turned on the radio. I was no longer waiting, mourning, or holding on. I was simply living. The silence that enveloped my home was no longer loneliness, it was freedom. 2 months after I had observed Eric outside the pharmacy, a letter arrived in my mailbox without a return address. I immediately recognized the handwriting. It was the same slanted, rushed, looping script that Sienna used to sign the pink letters she loved to send me, such as the one in which she instructed me to schedule a pickup. I opened the letter with a steady hand. Sienna was never the type to apologize, and I was correct. Her letter was a guilt trip disguised as a letter, a soft little whimper laced with passive-aggressive pity. It was one of those notes that said, "You win, but look what you've done." She wrote that I had ruined 2 lives and shattered a future, as if I hadn't simply reclaimed what was rightfully mine. Toward the end, she scrolled, hoping that it would be worth it. I folded the letter and placed it beneath the nearest coaster on my dining table. I refrained from tearing it, burning it, or even sighing, as it was indeed worth every moment of silence, every line of legal text I signed, and every tear I refused to allow them to see. Later that week, Ethan extended an invitation to dinner. He had been contacting me more frequently recently, and I could tell that something had changed, as if he had finally begun to see Eric and Sienna without the gloss. I no longer held his silence against him, not because it had not hurt, but because carrying it would have only served to exacerbate the situation. After we ordered, he fidgeted with the corner of his napkin. I simply wanted to express my gratitude. He asked for what? We met at a small restaurant near the marina, nothing fancy, just warm and familiar. He resembled the boy I used to read bedtime stories to, except that now he had the eyes of a man who had seen too much and spoken too little. I requested that he not be permitted to escape without consequence. I gazed at him for an extended period of time, not out of surprise, but rather because the words were so long overdue that I was unable to know how to stop him, he admitted, but he did. You did not merely lose a husband, you also lost your dignity in that marriage. Then you turned around and regained it on your own terms. My throat tightened, but I refrained from crying. I took a deep breath and informed him that I did not do it to punish him, sweetheart. I did it so that I could breathe again, so that the next woman like me would not feel compelled to disappear simply because someone decided she was not enough. He extended his arm across the table and grasped my hand. He informed me that there is a guest room at my residence. He also mentioned that you are. I smiled and shook my head as I already had something better. I replied, I have peace. A week later, I attended a women's seminar at the community center where Valerie had signed me up to speak without asking. She stated that you would be surprised by the number of women who need to hear your story. I did not believe I had anything special to say. I was not a polished speaker or a best-selling author. I was simply a woman. I saw the Carla who used to cry into a pillow when no one was around. The Carla who thought staying silent was the same as staying strong. As I looked around the room at the quiet eyes, folded arms, and worn-out expressions, I saw myself, not the version of me standing in front of them now calm and collected with clean paperwork and closure, but the Carla who had survived betrayal and humiliation. I stood up and told them everything, not just about Eric or Sienna or the court filings, but about the nights I sat alone at the kitchen table in a house I paid for, about the way people regarded me as the bitter ex-wife who was unable to move on, as silence becomes its own prison when no one is listening. I then explained how I was able to break free from this prison without resorting to rage, begging, drama, or destruction. Instead, I learned the value of a signature on the correct piece of paper, the strength of strategy, and the power of timing. Upon my completion, a woman hugged me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "You reminded me that it's not too late. It's never too late." I returned home that evening and I selected a fresh, untouched journal, not the one that was previously filled with heartbreak letters from years ago. On the first page, I penned, "This is not a second chapter. It is a new book." The following morning, Valerie contacted me with an update. The young black couple who purchased my old home had fully relocated. They had converted the back office into a nursery and transformed my old flower garden into a vegetable patch. They expressed that it finally felt like a home. For the first time in days, I smiled. Eric, on the other hand, was last heard to be renting a condo above a strip mall, where he shared the space with a man who charged him to use the washer and dryer. Sienna, on the other hand, disappeared from social media. Some speculated that she had relocated to Ohio, while others claimed she was working part-time in retail and telling people she used to live in a large house. Honestly, I don't care. The moment they decided I was disposable, the moment they moved her into my home and treated me like a footnote, they handed me the match. All I had to do was strike it. Currently, I am seated. In a kitchen that is entirely mine, there are no echoes of anyone else's footsteps, only my tea and the soft hum of a life that I have rebuilt from the ashes. The mug I am drinking from, which reads "Unbothered and Paid," was a gift from Valerie and brings me joy every time I use it. I no longer think about what I have lost. Instead, I reflect on what I have reclaimed: my dignity, my voice, and my name. The best part is that I did all of this without ever raising my voice, as silence is not always surrender. Sometimes silence is power in its purest form, and sometimes silence is a warning. Sometimes it is the quiet beginning of a war. People tend to believe that a story concludes when you have won, served the papers, closed the deal, and watched the individuals who disrespected you pack up and disappear. They believe that this is the finish line, where revenge is served, peace is restored, and the curtain is drawn. However, life does not pause just because someone believes that your chapter is over. Sometimes, the most powerful part of your story begins the moment they assume you have faded away. This was the case for me after Eric and Sienna vanished from my world, one into a void. I did not throw a party or strut around in triumph. Rather, I exhaled that long, aching breath that you don't realize you've been holding until your lungs finally remember what relief feels like. I took the money from the house, which was just over $370,000 after all, and I didn't spend it on flashy cars or luxury trips. I sat down with Valerie and did what every woman who has ever been underestimated should do. I made a plan. We met with a real estate agent, a financial planner, a black woman with natural curls, pearl studs, and eyes that missed nothing, evaluated my documentation, asked pointed questions, and expressed the desire to ensure that this money outlives the transgression. I smiled. That is precisely what I desired. I invested half of my savings and purchased a modern, clean condo that was exclusively mine. There were no co-signers or joint titles, and everything from the light switch to the mailbox was mine. I did not disappear in a dramatic or fabricated manner. Rather, I ceased to attend the same church, deactivated social media, and ceased to exhibit my presence in the area where the whispers were located. Where side glances clung to me like perfume, I allowed people to speculate as to where I had gone, whether I had lost my mind or finally moved on. I had relocated to a quiet town in northern New Mexico, far from the chaos of the past and anyone who had ever introduced me as Eric's ex-wife. Here I am simply Miss Foster, the woman who volunteers at the shelter, bakes an excessive amount of banana bread, plants marigolds, and hums old gospel on her porch. No one here knows that I once wept myself to sleep in a house that bore my name but not my name. My silence was once used as a meal for someone else's ego, and I prefer it that way. Occasionally, emails arrive from old acquaintances, some of whom are checking in, while others are fishing for gossip under the guise of concern. Occasionally, women reach out to ask for advice, wondering if it is too late for them to stand up. Last fall, Eric sent a brief email with the subject line, "I'm sorry I didn't open it." I deleted it immediately, as sometimes silence is the final answer, the kind that closes a door so tightly that it echoes. However, I did not stop. One afternoon, while sitting on my patio and admiring the garden I had constructed with my own hands, I came to the realization that I was not yet finished planting. I wanted to plant something more enduring than flowers. Consequently, I donated $50,000 from the sale of my house to a local women's legal fund. The donation was anonymous, and there was no plaque or photo opportunity. The only reference was a wire transfer and a note that read, "For the women who do not yet know they are allowed to fight back." 3 months later, the foundation announced in their newsletter that 3 women had utilized the funds to escape abusive marriages, with 2 of them filing lawsuits that altered their futures. This legacy is not limited to survival. It also illuminates a path for those who remain in the dark. I refrain from disclosing every detail to others, including the pink stationery, courtrooms, and Eric's expression when he realized I was not faking. However, occasionally I sit at my kitchen table with tea in hand, sunlight warming my face, and I jot down everything. Not for anyone else, but for me to recollect who I was when I walked through the fire and emerged unscathed. Eric did not merely lose his wife, he also lost access to my loyalty, softness, and silence. Sienna did not merely lose her home, she lost the illusion that she could establish a life on the ruins of another without feeling the flames. They both learned the lesson that people often overlook: never mistake the quiet ones for weak. Never assume that the polite ones lack the legal ability to destroy you. Never forget that the woman you passed may still be standing, waiting for you to pass. She will not scream, cry, or look back. She will cash out and leave you not only ruthless, but also peaceless. Therefore, when I sip from my favorite mug, which reads "Unbothered and Paid," I drink slowly because I earned every ounce of this peace and wanted it to last a lifetime. My name is Carla Foster, and I was divorced, discarded, and disrespected. I then reminded them legally, financially, and spiritually of who they were dealing with. They bet against the wrong woman. I sleep well, laugh frequently, and never feel guilty. Respond to prohibited communications. This is not an act of retribution.